Good evening, everyone. My name is Liz McKay. I am the Youth Services Supervisor here at the Ferguson Library, and I'm very pleased to have Peggy Budd and Tamara Jacobson here with us today. They are the co-authors of Navigating Special Education. I'll introduce Peggy first. Peggy is a licensed speech language pathologist with 30 plus years of experience in public education as an educator and as an administrator. For the past 12 years, as a founder of Speaking Skillfully, she has assisted families with the special education process and provides communication coaching to business leaders. As an author and TEDx speaker, she helps parents and educators through the IEP process to ensure the child is at the center of the conversation. She is on the board of both Bridge Academy and Earth Place. Welcome, Peggy.
Thank you for having us.
And Tamara is an author and national speaker and a licensed principal and superintendent. She's certified in communication arts, ESL, bilingual education, theater arts, early childhood, and elementary education. She has 30 plus years experience in private and public education and is currently director of East Coast Educational Consulting. Tamara assists families and school districts in the education process to ensure the child's needs are at the center of the conversation. She provides training in all relevant topics pertaining to the landscape of education in the 21st century and helps parents and educators during the IEP process. So welcome, Tamara.
Thank you so much.
So before we start with our conversation, there's a short video that we're going to play, and then we'll chat afterwards. Waiting for the lights to turn off. Takes a minute. There we go.
Meet Taylor. Taylor used to have a hard time in school and needed more help than other students to keep up with the curriculum. Taylor's parents weren't sure how to navigate the special education process. The school team was making recommendations about placement, programs, and services without considering their suggestions. Ineffective communication and lack of collaboration meant that meetings turned into heated arguments. After Taylor's parents and teachers read Navigating Special Education, they started to listen to each other and were able to communicate more effectively. Parents and educators now understood how to work collaboratively as partners with a shared vision. Everyone felt that their voices were heard during the IEP meetings, and their data-driven perspectives were considered when developing the education plan. As a result, Taylor's academic success improved dramatically. If you want to build a trustworthy parent-educator partnership to ensure student success, visit navigatingspecialeducation.com to order your book today. It's a win-win for everyone. Taylor used to have.
Okay, we'll wait for the lights to come back on. So that was a nice little nugget of, I think, a good synopsis of what the book does.
Definitely.
And so I guess my first question for you would be, what was the impetus for writing this book? Was there specific problems you were trying to solve in writing it?
Well, why don't you start with our story? I think that's important.
I think we'll back up just a little bit and we'll share a little bit about how we met, and then we'll get to what the impetus for the book was within the story. So approximately 10 years ago, prior to COVID, Peggy and I were on LinkedIn. Yes, LinkedIn's been around for a while. And we were reading a lot of negativity from the education world. And when Peggy and I looked at each other's posts, we realized that we had a grounded, similar idea of our values within our community of practice. And Peggy and I immediately were aware that we were of like minds. And so we decided to get together, and Peggy lives in Connecticut and I in central New Jersey. And so we decided that it would just be fun to meet like-minded people halfway. So we would meet in Tarrytown, Westchester. And when we would get together, we started talking and telling each other stories. And some of those stories are in our book. And as we were telling each other and sharing our experiences, both as administrators, speech pathologists, and as teaching, we realized that we needed to write it down and we needed to write a book. So both Peggy and I were excited, and we began to write this book. But the impetus for the book was the fact that parents and educators in both of our experience were not truly communicating. And this word communication kept coming up every time we would meet. And so the main focus that we realized that was missing from both parents and educators was this idea of communicating.
Right. And so, is the mic working? Okay. All right. That's absolutely right. Communication is the missing link, and it was the impetus for us to write this book because it was the only way we could get that message across. And I think the most important thing that parents and educators should understand about this book is the fact that we're not blaming anyone. It's about bringing everyone together and having them. That's why we're talking about creating positive partnerships. It's not that when the book is written that parents are doing something wrong or teachers are doing something wrong. They're not. So
tonight, Peggy and I thought it would be fun to share one of the pieces in our book. And this, it's from an unknown author. So if you're out there and it's you, we credited you, but you are published as unknown. It's called, I Do Not Like These IEPs. So I'm going to begin and Peggy's going to read with me. Do you like these IEPs? I do not like these IEPs. I do not like them. Geez Louise. We test, we check, we plan, we meet, but nothing ever seems complete.
Could you like the form? I do not like this form. Not page 1, not 2, not 3, another change, a brand new box. I think we've lost our rocks.
Could you all meet here or there? We could not all meet here or there. We cannot all fit anywhere, not in a room, not in a hall. There seems to be no space at all.
Could you meet again? I cannot meet again. No lunch, no prep. Please hear me speak. No, not at dusk and not at dawn. At 4 p.m., I shall be gone.
Could you hear while all speak out? Would you write the words they spout? I could not hear. I would not write. This does not need to be a fight. Sign here, date there, mark this, check that. Beware the teacher's advocate.
You do not like them, so you say? Try it again. Try it again. You just may. If you let me, I'll try again and you will see.
Say, I almost like these IEPs. I think I'll write 6003 and I will practice day and night until they say, you've got it right.
We put that in the book because we felt that there's always a conflict between parents and educators and what's going on with the IEP process And we believe that they have to form a partnership and they have to work together, and no one's happy about filling out forms. Of course not. But if we work together to meet the needs of the child, we will be able to collaborate. And the forms, we will start to like them because we will see that they give us the roadmap on how to educate the child.
Well, you lead me right into your next question because you just said it again. And I noticed when I was reading your bios. So when you say putting the child at the center of the conversation and building a shared vision, what do you mean by that?
Well, Tamara and I had spent so many times listening to parents and educators sit at meetings, and this is what it sounded like. The parents would come in and they would say, I want my child to have whatever it was, 5 hours of speech, a special aid. It didn't matter. It was always what they want. And educators would come to that meeting and they would say, this is what the district is going to offer. This is our program. This is where the child will go. The teacher will say, this is how I will help your child. And the child was not at the center of that conversation because nobody was talking about the needs of the child. And so that's where we're coming through, and we're saying to educate the child. Parents and educators have to build a partnership and have to meet the needs of the child, not what the parents want and not what the district has to offer. And if they both let go of that and come together and communicate and develop a shared vision as to the child's needs, it will be cost effective for districts, it will be less stressful for parents, and the child will be the winner.
Well, obviously that's the ultimate goal, right?
Of course it is. Thank you.
So in the book, you reference the 5C model. What are its, can you explain what the 5C model is?
There it is.
And
yes.
what are its strengths compared to other approaches? Can this model be used during parent-teacher conversations or during the IEP meetings or?
So we wanted to start by first telling everybody that Peggy and I created an actual grounded theory. So this is our original theory. It's called the 5C model, and we believe it's not only absolutely vital to relationship building and education, but it can also be used in any negotiation across any corporate setting. And we look at the boardroom like the IEP room, like the IEP team. So we begin with conversation and we move to collaboration, cooperation, compromise, with the ultimate goal being that the shared vision, both the parents and the school board and the school IEP team is on the same wavelength, and they come to a consensus about their programming, their placement, and their services. So I'm just going to take conversation, and then Peggy's going to pick up on collaboration and cooperation. So when we think about a conversation, I think it's very different than it was 10 years ago. And I think everyone would admit that all too often in the year 2023, sometimes we jump to conclusions. We see something negative, maybe even when there wasn't a meaning that was negative behind it. Or we move quickly to not really listening and just jumping to what somebody assumes is being said. And we reference in our book, there is an educator with the name David Angel, and he speaks about these 4 types of communication. And what Peggy and I want everybody to focus on is not the diatribe and not debating and discourse. We really want everybody to think about dialogue, not monologues, not I'm going to stand up and tell you what I want, not the district or the case manager saying this is what we offer. That's not a dialogue. A dialogue is a conversation with two people. And so our idea of a positive conversation is when both parties feel comfortable to get their vision or their ideas out on the table without feeling anxious or assuming nobody's listening. So it's very important that we start with having two-person or more conversations that are dialogues and not moving to a single person speech or a monologue.
And once you're having these conversations and asking deep questions, not just a telling question, but in asking the what, the why, the how, and really unpeeling the onion, so to speak, you're ready to understand the other person's perspective, which allows you to be open to collaborate. And I know that some of you might be looking and saying, collaborate, cooperate. What's the difference? I think they're the same. They're not really the same. They complement each other. When we collaborate, and in the case of parents and educators, it means that the parents and the educators have this shared vision of what they're going to do to work together to meet the needs of the child. That's collaboration. They're going to work with each other. Now, in addition to that, students have needs, children have needs, parents and educators also have things that they're going to do independently. It's important to support each other. So therefore, we have to work cooperatively. Parents have to be honest and transparent and talk about what's happening at home and what they're doing. And educators need to share what's happening in the classroom, and we need to work together in a cooperative way. So with those two, along with conversations, we're able to start to communicate. And then it goes to the fact that I know it sounds idealistic, and we know it's not always possible. Problems occur. Sometimes there's disagreement. So Tamara, why don't you talk about compromise? Because that's important.
So I have found in being an educational consultant over the past 15 years or so, I have found this is the most difficult in our 5C model, and that's compromise. Everybody, it's just natural to believe that what you think is right, and you're coming from such a good place. I don't want to give up A, B, and C. And the other team says, I don't want to give up A, B, and C. But again, when you think about the child, placing them in the center, then it makes it a little easier to compromise with one another. And one of the things we ask you when compromising is to look at perspective taking. So if we were having a conversation and I was actively listening and I needed to compromise, I really need to understand where you're coming from. I need to learn your perspective, understand where you're coming from in order to get to that place of compromise. And then eventually, I need to have empathy. You don't need sympathy, but you have to empathize with the other person's perspective. And we talk a lot about perspective taking and eventually getting to empathy and active listening when we talk about compromise. And of course, if you can't compromise, you're not going to get to consensus. So at that point, Peggy and I like to say, our model is a loop. So if you get to any of these stages and you can't come back, you need to go all the way back. It's almost like a board game. And you need to start those conversations over and over until you get to where you understand the other person's perspective. And I'll let Peggy finish up with getting to consensus.
Well, consensus is what our goal is really about, because we want to make sure that we are going to meet the child's needs. And Yeah, and we're going to meet them where parents and educators have a shared vision of what that looks like. So that's consensus. And if we've gone through this model, and as Tamara said, we may have to go back and have more conversations, but eventually we're going to come to a point where we all agree that this is the best or most appropriate program or services or goals for the child, and we then can implement it and move forward. And this also comes from building trust and being transparent with each other, because if there's no hidden agendas, we're much more likely to not only compromise, but then agree.
And I just want to add to that we believe that it may not happen in 1 or 2 meetings. Getting to consensus takes time, and that's okay. And one of the things as educational consultants we'd like to let everybody know is it is within the law that you can ask for many meetings. So it's okay if it takes time. You have that permission, and relationship building is, it's a journey.
I'm really glad you said what you said about going back, because all I could think of was getting to the best result or consensus at this time. Like, it's going to change, teachers change, so I thought that was really important to emphasize that.
And to add to that, and to the multiple meetings, too often the stress gets raised because parents attend a meeting and they're told, well, we have 1 hour to create your child's IEP. There hasn't been anything, and all of a sudden all this is happening, and it doesn't allow for conversations. If there's only an hour, take that time, move it along to where you can, and then reconvene until you can come back and continue the conversation. Stress and anxiety happen when parents are pushed into, well, we have to get through this, and you have to agree, and this is what we're going to do. And now no one is happy, and the child isn't getting the best program. So if we can follow this 5C model, we know that districts will save money because there won't be time spent in litigation or arguments, and students will be better off.
That's the goal.
That's the goal.
So now this book focuses heavily on data. And can you explain why data is so important, and if you have examples of how to show that?
Right. So, hi. So I'm going to take that question about data. I would say when Peggy and I were writing this book, we kept coming up looking at our model on, the anxiety of the teachers to please the administration, the anxiety of the administration, making sure that everybody's IEPs are, being upheld. And of course, the anxiety from the parents doing what is appropriate for their children. And with data, what Peggy and I want to emphasize the most is that when you come to a meeting, and this stems back to when we were educators and we had something called student, portfolios. We had to keep a little piece of work from all of the students and put them in a folder and then present them at, open school night, right? And so it's the same idea, but now we're asking the parents as well as the teachers to collect data. We firmly believe that when you come with evidence and you bring material that supports your opinion, so it's not just la, 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 it's, I can show you this. It has a lot of strength. There is power in data, and the data doesn't have to be, I'm writing in a book, I'm anecdoting everything. Data can be as simple as a video. Data can be, I'm struggling with my student for homework, and the teacher says, I don't see that. So you ask, somebody to videotape when the child is doing their homework just a little bit, or when they're reading a book. The teacher says, your child is reading on a second grade level. And the parent says, I think they're reading like pre-K. And the teacher says, no, I'm telling you, this child is reading the second grade book. On the part of the teacher, if they get permission and could do a little video, if the parent signs off on that, that's a very powerful tool for the educator to show, look, this student is reading at a second grade level. And what it does is it takes the argument away from that meeting, and everyone is really studying and looking at that data very closely. In our book, we actually have not just an entire chapter on how to collect data. We have exemplars, we have examples, we have checklists for parents, we have behavioral data checklists, we have physical, what are some physical issues going on? We have behavioral, social, emotional, and academic checklists. And we feel we've done a very thorough job at showing both parents and educators how to collect data. So that is that comes under data collection. I think Peggy might want to say a word about data.
I just want to share a story because we all love stories. And our book is filled with case studies and stories. There was a parents who came to a meeting really with the idea that their child was not making progress in writing, and that they felt that the goals needed to be changed, that the program needed to be changed. Thankfully, the teacher was very focused on the power of data and came to the meeting with the child's journal and showed the parents first the way the child had written at the beginning of school, and the parents see how they're struggling, and then flipped through and showed the parents several more examples of their child's writing. Well, I can tell you that the parents started to cry because they didn't see that their child was doing that at home. The conversation changed, the tone of the meeting changed. And that was where the parents were able to start to, and teachers were able to start to cooperate, because there was conversations about what parents could do at home to help the child so that they would be carrying over what they clearly had learned to do at school. So the power of data, whether it's on the part of the teacher or the part of the parent, can really be powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you said it takes the emotion out of it, because it's very hard to get emotional when you see, well, as you said, you can get emotional about it, but in a different kind of a way, a positive way.
Emotion, and positive emotions are great.
Yeah. And, children and adults, have a different presentation at home sometimes than they do at school. So
Definitely.
I love that idea of taking just a little clip. Everybody takes videos of their kids now. How hard is that?
No.
So you mentioned the word team. What do you mean by the word team, and why is this a critical concept for a successful PPT and IEP?
Okay, that's such a good question. And that's really almost the premise of our book. Federal law that drives all of the IEP process very clearly says two things. One, that a team must be formed, that parents and educators must work together on this team, and they say that they should together develop the child's IEP. And so a team is great, but I know that all of you have been on teams, and many times on a team, you don't feel like you have a voice. You feel like you're not really heard. And that's what is wrong with the team process. So we have tried to talk about moving the team and having them understand how to communicate as partners, because it's really about, again, goes back to communication. So the team process, also, all teams have leaders going from the fact that the leader is bringing whatever the agenda of the school district. The ultimate team is a sports team, and every team has a coach. And believe me, nobody is going to play in that game if the coach didn't say so, even if everybody else. So the team leader is powerful. If you're partners, you remove that. And so we want to move the team into a mindset of partnerships. And that means going back to our communication theory of, in order to be partners, partners do things a little differently. They don't have monologues, they have dialogues, they have deep conversations, they truly have empathy. They can stand in each other's shoes and look at it from each other's perspective. And they develop the ability to listen to each other. They really understand how to be an active listener. So that's why we want to move teams to partnerships.
And just to add a little bit to partnerships, if you think about a team, you are working together and you're melding ideas on that team, but there's multiple ideas. When you start off in partnerships, it's a smaller subset. So it's like taking two people's shared vision, and it's easier to sort of come to a coming of the mind when it's two people, and then you can add somebody. And so also it's not so scary. So if you have a partner that's on the team that you've already spoken to, you walk into that room with decreased anxiety as well. And that's part of the reason we came up with this idea about partnerships before you're working or as you're working on a team.
That made me think of a couple of things. It sort of dances on the line between collaboration and cooperation. I mean, I think both situations have that, but there's something a little more egalitarian, I guess, about the partnership idea where everybody's really bringing their personal expertise to the table, and it's not just following the leader of
Correct.
whoever is.
Right.
I like that. Yeah.
Right. It definitely, and that's the whole problem. We both have experienced parents so often saying, I didn't feel I had a voice.
Mhm.
And we want parents to have a voice. We want educators to have a voice, and going back, but we want them to have a voice so that the child is at the center of that conversation.
Right. So you mentioned parents a lot. So let's talk about parent engagement. Parents definitely want to be involved in the process, but you reference they don't feel that they're being heard, or they just don't know how to start or who to start with. Are there some specific pitfalls that they can try to avoid, and what kinds of approaches can they use?
Okay, so in our book, we explicitly talk about one tool that is also original to Peggy and I. And we were both administrators. And I know that when we talk about teachers now looking at culturally responsive teaching and CRT and everything, we all talk about how we need to be aware of the students and the families that are in their classes and representing those cultures in the classroom. One of the ways in which we can really make a big difference for parents, to answer your question, is we're actually asking the administrators to take a chunk at that. And we're saying, since the administrators are more like the coach, it's really incumbent upon them to invite the parents to what we've coined a pre-meeting. And that is the concept that before an IEP meeting, when the school year begins, there is someone in authority, principal, vice principal, case manager, whomever, who's going to have a pre-meeting with the family, the parents and or caregiver of the students who are on the IEPs and or the 504s. And by having this pre-meeting, we talk about maybe a 30-minute meeting. If it needs to be a little shorter, we understand. But within that meeting, the first few minutes, how are you? What do you do for a living? What do you speak at home? What do your students enjoy? What do you enjoy doing with your kids? Just breaking down the walls, and then bringing up, what are you really looking for this year for your student? What do you think would be, an excellent vision for your child's journey this year. Some open-ended question to get the parents to speak. And by having these pre-meetings, it's not going to be the first time that they've met the coach or the boss or the authoritative team member. They will feel that they have maybe a friend, maybe a partner on that team when they walk into that first IEP meeting. So that is one major tool that might help the parents. And then the other thing is food always helps, right, Peggy?
Sure, feed them and lead them, as they say.
Feed them and lead them.
But another thing that we have in our book that is very unique is we created what we call conversation starters. And this is something that if a parent's reading the book, they can see these conversation starters as a way to think about what they might want to share at the meeting, whether it's what they find their child's challenge or their hopes and dreams, or something that their child does really well at home and they're not quite sure what's going on at school. Or this is something that the case manager or the person that they're meeting with, or even the classroom teacher can give to the parents and say, here's a way to be prepared. Because let's face it, to come to a meeting, you want to feel that you've done something to be prepared and you're not just walking in feeling open and vulnerable. And that's another important strategy that we talk about in our book and feel will help parents start to partner and help teachers feel that they hear what's going on and it's not this I want, you want, or I have, you have kind of thing.
I mean, that's good advice for any meeting.
Of course it is. Well, that's what we're saying. We've really said that our model is really something that it's just effective communication to how to work together as a team so that everyone has a voice. And we've used the IEP process as a springboard for that conversation.
So the book is filled with tips.
Yes, it is.
And are there some particular ones, favorites that you would like to share?
I'll go first. I really love the section in our book for parents where we give them written and verbal correspondence. And so we offer advice to parents who to speak to and when. When is it time to go to the teacher? When is it time to go to an administrator? And what do those not texts, but emails look like? Nowadays, nobody hand writes in stationery, but we actually talk about how it's very powerful to still hand write a letter, but that's just us. However, when writing these emails, we actually have in the book several pages of examples of what to write to administrators. And we have examples for starting educators of what is appropriate language with their students' parents. So I love that.
One of my favorite parts of the book is filled with case studies. And the reason I say that it's a favorite part is that parents can read one of these stories, and we love stories, and can identify, oh, that happened to me. Maybe not everything, but something that happened. And so they know, well, I'm not the only one that had this experience. I'm not the only one. And that is really a very useful and comforting thing to have, along with the fact that we now, as you go through these stories, we give ideas like, what are the effective things to do if you're stressed? We give some tips. Or what is the way to more actively listen? All of the things that we talk about, we have real strategies. We lay out. We don't just say, do this. We really lay out how you do this, because it's not just to do, but you have to have the tools to do it.
And also in the case studies, number one, they're all real. They've been annotated, and they don't have everyone's exact name and place, and of course, but they really happened. And that's why we love reading and sharing our stories with audiences. But on top of that, as Peggy said, we do try and solve what happened at the end. And if what actually happened maybe had a negative outcome, we try and state how it would have a positive outcome. So the case studies are our favorite. I think both of our favorite.
They
parts.
are, definitely.
Well, I mean, I think anybody doing this process would the potential to feel very isolated and alone if you're not in a group that's connected. So that's got to be really helpful to, as you said, know that other people have gone through and are going
Definitely.
through what these parents would be going through. So you had designed this book to be a roadmap for parents and for educators. And the purpose obviously being to put effective communication into the IEP process. And so you mentioned exemplars and strategies on how to do that. Can you tell a little bit more about that? Exemplars, especially?
Well, the exemplars are not only the correspondence, but we have exemplars on how to collect data, because a lot of times parents feel overwhelmed, and sometimes teachers feel it's hard and too time consuming. So we've broken everything down.
We broke down active communication, active listening, everything from body language, eye contact. We really talk a lot about being responsive, not just looking like you're listening, but really listening. But actually, to answer that broadly, I think every other page we have specific examples. For example, a guide to successful participation, and we list 6 ways that you can be successful. So each one of our subtitles, we mention how to be positive and how to drive a different outcome than maybe what the norm was.
Well, I mean, you've talked a lot. I think there's obviously a lot in here for anyone, and it sounds almost as though you could read it from beginning to end, but you could also dip in and find examples as apply to you where you are right now.
Correct. It has a very good index, so that, the glossary of terms, but it also has a really easy to use index. So if a parent has a specific concern, they can go in the back of the book and can read that chapter, or can just read that section as it applies, because certain things apply in various places within the book. And so that is so important when parents are trying to do that.
I have a question that just occurred to me. So something that sometimes happens in schools is a parent might come in and say, I want my child to have an IEP, and the teachers may come back and say your child doesn't need an IEP. Can you explain a little bit about where that gray area is in between for parents? Because I think that's...
Well, there are 3 things that need to happen in order, according to the law, that says in order for the child to actually get an IEP. So if a parent is concerned, what happens is you would automatically go to an IEP meeting and sit down and share your concerns. And again, if you, the parent, had these concerns, bring data. Why do you have the concerns? If you can bring evidence, then that's going to be one step in the right direction. No matter whether you have good evidence to show that your child requires special education, the law still says that they have to be evaluated. So this meeting will go through the evaluation process, and then you'll come back and discuss it. And the criteria is your child, they have to find out that your child actually has a disability. Then they have to find out that that disability is significantly impacting their ability to access learning and school, or whatever is happening that the parents are concerned about. And then lastly, just because they have those 2, they have to thirdly need specialized instruction. So if they have a disability and they are struggling, maybe it means that they need a 504 plan, because it might mean that they just need some accommodations. We talk about that in the book too. Again, if a parent has concerns, you have to have that meeting.
But I will clarify that parents can write a letter, drop it at the director of special services that they would like their child evaluated. We actually, I do believe, have an example of how to write the letter for asking for the child to be evaluated. And upon that, it is the law that they will have a meeting, and definitely bring the data or the concerns to that initial meeting. With that, they have a certain number of days to conduct the evaluation, and then everyone will come back. And like Peggy said, it'll be a difference between whether the student will be a general education student and just need some help, but be able to remain, as a general education student on a 504, or if it really has major impacts, and then that child would receive an IEP.
Right. Or sometimes it's found that they just need some differentiated instruction and they don't really need an accommodation and they don't need a 504 or special ed. But the assessment may identify, oh, well, if we just do some differentiated instruction that the child needs something. And that's the good news.
And actually what you said just made me think, I'm sure the opposite must happen where a teacher suggests somebody. And so I would imagine that this book would be very helpful as a parent on the receiving end of that, who says, what do you mean my child needs special education? I don't know anything about special education.
Right, of course. Of course. That's what we wrote this book for, parents and educators. And no one else has written a book that really talks about the process through both lenses.
So, I mean, you've been very comprehensive in talking about this. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Just that we're thrilled, and thank you for inviting us here to the Ferguson Library.
Thank you so much, Liz.
It was, wonderful that we could be here. We hope that parents, that you have gained some insight and we find this helpful. You can always get our book if you want it. We're available if you want to talk to us.
We also have a website just for the book, which we have some blogs and we have some important information about the book, and our video is there, the one that we showed, and that's called navigatingspecialeducation.com. navigatingspecialeducation.com. And so you can log on and there's a link to purchase the book, but you'll also read a whole bunch and look at our models. And we just have a lot of nuggets, like you said, about our book on there.
Because we just want parents and educators to work together. So again, the child can be the winner.
We want student success.
Definitely.
Well,
Thank
for
you.
anyone who's not physically in the room right now, we will have links to your website. And obviously from there, they can purchase the book, but we'll also have the book in our collection. So if anybody wants to find out what it's all about. So I think that this would be really helpful to a lot of parents, even parents who don't have kids who need special accommodations or education. I really like the 5C model.
Right. Well, every parent has to.
We like it too.
We like it too, but every parent has to have a conversation with their child's teacher. This isn't just unique to special education.
And I think a challenge with having conversations after COVID is that there was a lot of comfortability with staying at home or doing Zoom. And we do want to stress that there is nothing like being in person. And we don't want to see everybody lose that engagement piece. And being engaged personally is something that Peggy and I did for years, meeting up, because we didn't feel that it was as important to be on the phone, and we always meet up now. So just wanted to emphasize that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, both of you, Tamara and Peggy, for coming in today. And if anybody has any questions afterward, they are available to speak with you.
Thank you.
So thanks.
Yeah. And we'll go on over to the book section and we'll answer questions.